Hey adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for Bonds of Chaos by Zack Argyle. This is the third and final book in the Threadlight trilogy. So this is a high fantasy, epic fantasy, military fantasy, self-published book. It's the same things that I've been talking about for the other two books in the series, which, if you didn't notice, I filmed all three of these videos on the same day. I have a lot more written in this review than I did in either of the previous two, so maybe it won't end up being a 3-minute review like the Stones of Light video or review was. So anyways, let's get into this. Bonds of Chaos is book 3 of the Threadlight trilogy by Zack Argyle. I just mentioned that. I also mentioned this is the final book in the series, and it has a lot to cover. This last book has a lot of ground that it needs to cover in order to end where it's supposed to end. As a fantasy reader, you can kind of expect where stories are supposed to end at some time, sometimes. That's what I'm trying to say. In this one, you knew from the very beginning there is a lot of ground that needs to be covered before we can reach the end of this book. Almost to the point where it could have been split into 2 books without much of an issue. I say this because I remember getting to a point and thinking, this is about to get wrapped up. And at that same time, I was also knowing that there was so much more that still needed to happen. And when I looked at where I was in the book, I was only about halfway through. I think it was just over halfway through, probably like 55% of the way through, or 58 or something like that, I don't know. But I wasn't that far through the book itself, and so I knew that there was a lot left that needed to happen. And so I can say we had an ending point, and we've still got a whole other story that could be told. So that's why I'm saying it maybe could have been split into 2 books. As it wasn't even, for a epic fantasy book, it wasn't even that long of an epic fantasy book. I don't know the exact page count or word count, but I would guess somewhere in the 500 pages. So not quite long enough to split into 2 books. But anyways. That being said, this book did not feel too long. The pacing was kept up nicely, and the plot that was happening was not just filler fluff. It was not just there to fill out this page count so that we could then get to have a big, long, epic fantasy book. That's not what it was at all. Once again, I largely enjoyed this book. There were also some things in this one that I didn't love quite as much. Mainly one event or trope type thing that I have an issue with pretty much in every story that it's used in. I feel like there's plot holes, and I feel like it doesn't always work. In fact, I feel like the majority of the time it does not work. At the same time though, in this story, I actually do think that it was executed well enough, and so I don't hate it. It's just one of those things that I don't love seeing. It didn't really affect my enjoyment of the series, but of the specific book, it did a little bit. There's also, kind of tied to this event, and it's something that I may have just forgotten, but there's a sequence let me read it, because that'll be clearer than me just trying to make it up. And it may have just been me forgetting it after it happened, but I do not remember seeing Chris's part during this sequence. I specifically remember noting it and hoping we'd come back to it later in the book, because it seemed like something that we would, well, for one, everybody else was getting these moments, and so for Chris not to have one, it was really weird. But I just expected, okay, this is going to tie back into the story at a later point, and maybe I just forgot it because I didn't find it at that later point when I was hoping to. Again, possibly it's something that I just forgot. I don't know. I'll have to talk to somebody else who's read this series and try and figure out the answer to that, because I just don't remember. But what that did lead to for many of our characters was some great moments of choice and character development, facing things that would have been hard to deal with without this sequence. And I do appreciate that, and the storytelling that went into it. It answered some questions that we had, and that's only a good thing. We explore a good bit more of the magic and the metaphysics of this world as well during this story, and as someone who's a massive fan of magic and world building, I loved seeing this. Seeing how it worked and how it tied into everything, also seeing and learning more about the bonds, which is intricately connected with the Threadlight magic while still having its own way of working. I love seeing combinations of different parts of of the worlds and of the magic systems. It reminds me of some of what Sanderson was attempting to do and experiment with in Mistborn Era 2 with the combinations of allomancy and feruchemy. And that type of thing always has me excited, seeing how the combination of two different things can create something completely new and different. Right here, I'd just quickly like to say though, if you're liking what you're seeing from an Erudite adventure, we'd really appreciate it if you would like, comment, and subscribe. So really though, what makes this series shine is once again the characters. The relationships, the duty, the leadership, just everything about this book from a character perspective worked really well for me. Our characters have grown so much and been through so much now. In many ways, I do wish that we had more books in the series. I want to see more about this world, especially as it moves forwards after the finale. But I'm very happy to be able to say that this book didn't fall into the trap that I've seen so many others do, where the finale happens and then the book ends. We got that falling action, we got to see a bit of that new normal after the end of the book. And that's something that I'll continually be grateful for, whether it's in this book going forward or in other books that I'm seeing. It's one of those things that I'll always be grateful for when I see examples of it in books. This was a really solid ending to a really solid trilogy, but I actually do think that I like book 2 more than I like book 3, but that is mostly because of that one thing that I didn't care for in the story. Without that, I think due to the character exploration, as well as the in-world religions and the world building, both physical and metaphysical, and just the story itself, this book probably would have been my favorite of the trilogy, except for that one thing that happened. And that thing didn't take my enjoyment of the series down, but it did take my enjoyment, or it kept my enjoyment of the book being as high as it could have been if done differently. That's kind of confusing. The way my brain works this story out is, or my rating, I guess, of this story out is a little bit weird. I'm going to close this out now. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. We are posting videos every Monday and Thursday, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.